Hi friends, it's Shari. Today I have some quick and easy critter bookmarks to share. These were inspired by those really fun and punny Valentines we used to get when we were in elementary school. Do you remember those? So I'm going to show you how to make 6 of these today, but you could make them with any stencils or any critters you have in your stash. I thought these would be a great project to do with kids for Valentine's. So we're using I Heart Pandas, Sent with Love, Would You Be Mine, Porcupine for You, Wild Wolves, and Kangarific. And as I said, you could just pick one, you could pick all of these. I just wanted to give you a lot of ideas of some quick and easy projects that you could create. So of course we need our bookmark die, so I'll pull that out. But first I'm going to color. I've stamped all my images in some jet black ink so that I can color with my alcohol markers. But depending on your color medium, you could use whatever ink you wanted. I think that these would be fun stamped in different colors too. So I'm starting out with this little rock here. This is from I Heart Pandas, but I actually have 2 rocks. I'm going to color them exactly the same, just with some simple shading. I think that this would be a fun way to bring the kids in to help as well. They could color and make these custom Valentines for their friends. This is that second rock. This is from the Wild Wolves stamp set, and I'm using the same colors. Again, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible because I have so many little images to color. You could always just pick one theme for all of these if you're making a whole bunch and color everything the same. So you can make a whole bunch of pandas, you can make a whole bunch of skunks, whichever is your favorite critter for these little Valentine bookmarks. Now I'm moving on to the bamboo with my little panda here. I'm using 2 different colors to color the stalk, and then I'm picking 2 different colors for the leaves. I think using a different shade of green or a darker shade of green for the leaves really makes them stand out even more. I just really love these little bamboo shoots. And then, of course, we have our little panda. He is minimal coloring with that really light, warm gray. And of course, this stamp set happens to have the coloring stencils, so you could always use that as well. Pick some images that have coloring stencils and just color away with those inks. I'm adding some little rosy cheeks to my panda, and then I'm moving on to this box of chocolates. Now, this is from the Scent with Love add-on. The add-on had a lot of fun accessories, and I knew I wanted to use the sentiment on the bookmark that talked about being sweet, so that is why I picked out the box of chocolates for my little skunk. I'm coloring that in some reds, and then I'm pulling out an even darker red for the edges of that box, the part that goes verticals, because it is more in shadow. And then I'm using some teal colors for the bow. I'm also going to add that little balloon with my skunk as well. As I said, I picked about 3 images per bookmark, and that was a really good amount to make a little scene at the bottom. Now this little bouquet of heart flowers, this is from Kangarific, so it is going to go with my kangaroo there. I did try to kind of group my images that would be on the same bookmark on my same little piece of cardstock here so that I could kind of color them together and know what colors I'm using. And now I'm moving on to my skunk. I'm using a dark gray. I don't like using black on black critters like this because I feel like I lose the details. So I'm using that darker gray for my shadows, and then I'll blend it out with a slightly less darker gray. And I get that look of a black critter without losing the details of their face and their eyes. Now for the white part of my skunk, I don't like it being super white, so I'm using an E000 to give it a bit of a warm tone. I also forgot the back of his ear, so I added that, and then a little pink in his ear and for his nose. And then I'll blend out that really pale brown. Now I'm moving on to the last critter on this little sheet of cardstock I have here, which is the cute little kangaroo from Kangarific. And I love that the die for this actually cuts a slit for the pocket, which is where I'm going to put that little bouquet of flowers. But just as before, I'm using a darker shade to start with for the shadowing, and then I'm blending out with that E13, which is a lighter shade. Now on this little kangaroo, I'm going to add a little bit of texture. I'm going to pull out an even darker brown and just add some little dots here and there. And I think this is a fun way to just add a little more interest to an image. You could always add some white gel pen details as well, but it just kind of makes it stand out a little bit more. So we have one set of critters done. I'll set that little sheet of cardstock aside and move on to the others. So this is that cute little beaver from Would You Be Mine. I also stamped out the big log for it to sit on and those little cattails. Now this is going to be a lot of brown. My cattails are my only point to pull in a little bit of color with the green, but that's okay because we're going to be putting these on some colorful backgrounds. So I'm using lots of shades of brown for my beaver. I used 2 shades for his body and then 2 even darker shades for the tail. And of course, I've got that dark gray again for his nose. Now I didn't want my beaver to be exactly the same color as the log that he is sitting on, so I am going to pull out some different browns for the log. So I have that E57 and I'm just adding some darker against the sides or the ends of the log, I should say, and across the bottom. And then I'm going to pull in that E13, which is a lot lighter. So you can see that it is a bit different and he is going to stand out just a bit more from that log. And then of course I have the end of the log that I want to be a lighter color like we cut through it. And while I have that E00 out, I'm going to move up to my little porcupine and use that for the body of the porcupine and use that E02 just for some shading and then blend that out. And while I'm up here at my porcupine, I'm just going to go ahead and color the quills. And I really like using the E70s for a different kind of shade of brown. It's a little less warm, a little less orange, and I think that it just gives some nice contrast to all that brown orange that we have all the time. So you could have used this for the log as well. That would have been a great option. And then finally, I'm pulling out a really dark one. I always like to trace the quills, kind of gives it some nice texture. And we'll add a little pink to the ear, a little pink cheek. And then while I had that E out, let's do our little snail. So I've got the snail body and then I've got the shell, which I'm going to make purple. So back to our cattails down here. This is my only really bright color on this one is the green. And then of course we have the brown cattails. Luckily, when you die cut these out and you have that white border, it makes those images pop against each other. And then, of course, our last critter up here is the wild wolves. I thought about using the wolves that were the couple, but I really like this guy that's howling because I think just he's just so cute, howling at the moon or howling at whatever he's howling at. And I think it will go great with the sentiment that I want to use. So I'm just using some grays there, and then I'm going to add a little bit of gray to the white area, and then I'm going to blend it out with that E00. And this is just going to give it a warm tone on that white area so it's not so stark white. I really think it makes it look like it has a little more life in the image. I'm blending that out to nothing with that 0, and then of course I did color in his mouth, which I missed there in the video. And then finally I have those cute little mushrooms for a pop of color on my porcupine bookmark, and I'm just coloring those in with 2 shades of pink. Then I did the stems of them with that E00, and then I decided to make some pink spots on them as well. And I did have a little bit of cleanup I needed to do with that white gel pen. Now I can cut all of these out with their coordinating dies. I have them in this little tray, kind of grouped in their groupings, and now it's time to cut some bookmarks. So the really easy way to make that bookmark background that's really simple is to use some pattern paper. So what I decided to do was pull out all my Spiffy Speckles colors, and these are going to be my background. So I'm going to have one of each color. But I am going to step it up a notch and do some stenciling, which depending on your pattern paper, you would not have to do this if you wanted to keep it a little more simple, but I thought it would be fun to show you another idea on what you could do to these cards. And again, stenciling is a great way for kids to get involved. So I actually planned out each one, what color and what stencil I would use for each one. So you saw there when I was going through them, I had little post-it notes that said pandas green stuck on my bamboo stencils. And that actually made all this stenciling go really fast because I had my plan, I had it written out, and I didn't have to think about it very much. So I'm starting with the bamboo on the green with green. So all of these are going to be tone on tone stenciling. This one is a three-part stencil. I use celery stick for the first two steps. And then for the leaves, once I get those lined up, I'm going to use the freshly cut grass ink. And I'm not being very particular about my stenciling, I'm being pretty loose because I just want this to be a subtle background with my images at the bottom. So moving on to my yellow Spiffy Speckles paper, I have the bunting background stencils. I will use two different colors for this as well because it is a two-part stencil. So this is peach fuzz ink for the little pennants. I actually probably could have skipped this one at the bottom because my images covered that up completely, but I was just having fun stenciling, which is kind of the fun part of this project. You can kind of do it in batches, color some things one day, stencil them the next day, and then assemble them. It was a lot of fun to kind of create these. And for the strings, I'm using Peachy Keen ink, which is that really pretty kind of peachy pink color. And for this one, I did grab a smaller blending brush to get into those tiny little spaces. I think this works really well for those little spaces because I usually make a mess with that big with that big brush when I'm trying to do really small things. Next up, I have the birch tree stencil on the blue Spiffy Speckles, and I'm using Forget Me Not ink. Now I am going to show you a little trick with this one once I get these trees kind of stenciled in. The bookmark itself is just slightly longer than the 6-inch stencil. You can see that little bump at the top. So you can see I have some kind of straight parts of the tree at the top where the stencil ended, but we can easily kind of cover this up. Also, did you notice that I did this with my purple brush and not my blue one? That was not on purpose. So I'm switching over to blue and I'm just kind of dusting the top with the ink, and it kind of helps hide where that stark ending of that tree is. Moving on to purple, I have some grape jelly ink, and this is one of my favorite stencils, the Lots of Heart background. This is a two-part stencil. You could just do one. I am going to do both, so it's nice and full of hearts. I'm using the same ink, but trying to have a slightly lighter hand so that there is a little bit of difference between the two hearts. And then I'm also going to dust the edges a little bit with the ink to kind of define them just a little bit. Everything is more fun when you kind of dust the edges with some ink. Moving on to pink, I have the Falling Hearts stencil. Again, this one is two parts as well, but I'm using Wild Rose ink, and I will use that Wild Rose ink for both layers. This is all up to you what you want to do. I'm just trying to keep it nice and simple so I can do a whole bunch pretty quickly, but you could make it as complicated as you like. I actually pulled in a little bit of that peachy keen ink to try to give that second layer of hearts just a slightly different tone, and then I dusted the top. So it really kind of looks ombre going from the top to the bottom. And then finally, I'm moving on to that teal piece. I'm using the new layered hearts backdrop. This is that really fun one that has those lines of hearts that overlap. And I'm using mermaid ink on all the layers of this because where they overlap, it's going to be darker and you're going to see that. Now I could leave it like this. I like those little kind of pairs of hearts, but I decided to do all the hearts on this one, and I'm glad I did because this one is for my beavers and my little sentiment I put on there was very small. So I liked filling it up with those hearts. And for this one, I'm going to kind of dust the edges as well. So there's all my backgrounds finished. And they just look really pretty, just like this actually. To sturdy them up a little bit, since I use pattern paper, I did cut a white bookmark for each one, and I'm just going to basically laminate the two together so the background is nice and white. If you wanted to write something, that'd be a great place to write it if you're giving this as a gift. And I'm using liquid glue to do this just so that these pieces are nice and stuck together. So I went around all the edges. Then I'm going to put that white on the back, making sure it's the two back sides together so I get that nice finish back on the bookmark. and it's nice and sturdy. And I did this to all of my bookmarks. I'm just not going to show you all of that in the video. So they all have the back on them, and now it's time to put my critters on. So I will start with my bamboo and my pandas, which is where I started in my stenciling and my coloring. And for my bookmark, I chose the Sleepy Little Panda from the I Heart Pandas add-on. You really could pick any image you wanted from any of the stamp sets. They're all sized perfectly to where they would fit on the bottom of this bookmark, just perfect. So I have my cute little Sleepy Panda. Now the bamboo is from the regular I Heart Pandas set because I really wanted this long bamboo. I think these are really fun, especially layered over that bamboo stenciled background. And I am gluing everything directly to this bookmark. Obviously, these are bookmarks and we're going to stick them in our book, so we want them as flat as possible. Then I have my little howling wolf on my pink falling hearts background. Next up, I have my little beaver, so I'm going to add that little log. And you could always kind of put it off the side and trim it off if you didn't want the images overhanging, but I like the look when the images overhang like that. Next up, my little Scent with Love skunk and his box of chocolates. And you can see how I covered up the ones at the bottom, so they really didn't matter. Now for the balloon, I wasn't quite sure where I wanted it to be. Like he's holding it with the chocolates, it was tied to his tail, I don't know. But I ended up putting it where it looks like it goes behind and he's holding it behind the box of chocolates. Then I have my cute little porcupine and my mushrooms with the snail. And then finally, I have my kangaroo, and I'm putting the little bouquet in the slit of the pouch. And when I laid this on here, it was a little too plain. So I actually stamped and colored and cut out one of the trees from the Kangarific add-on, and that really kind of completed this bookmark. So now they all have their images and we're ready to stamp our punny sentiments on them. And I decided to kind of keep them a little less Valentine-y. You could stamp whatever you wanted, but I wanted these to kind of be everyday because once Valentine's is over, you still want to use this cute little bookmark, am I right? Now for this one, I did have to cut my stamp. Don't freak out. It will be fine. It will stamp perfectly when I want to line it back up. But I like you are stinking sweet with that box of chocolates. I did have to do the same for my wolf. I'm going to stamp that little howl there first, but the sentiment in this add-on set, I wanted to stack it, so I'm cutting that apart and I'll stack it and stamp it as one. Now I'm going to show you in a minute how to do this without cutting your stamp. So for this one, I wanted it to say, "You're so porcupine." And I wanted to show you how you could do this without cutting your stamp apart. We want to pick it up on a block and we're going to just selectively ink it. And it's really easy to do when you're kind of doing the left and the right of a sentiment like this. So I just inked up the word porcupine and stamped that, then wiped it off, then inked up "You're so." Now for the Kangarific one, I didn't really like all the sentiments in here. They didn't really work with what I wanted it to say. So I wanted it to say, "You're so Kangarific," just like the porcupine. And luckily, this set and the porcupine set have the same font and I can mix and match, which is perfect. So I stamped Kangarific, then I'm going to pick up that same sentiment I used on the porcupine one and just ink up the "You're so" part. So now you can see they match perfectly. And then finally, we have our little beaver. This is "I Choose You," which I think is just so cute. Now you could add little heart embellishments to these if you wanted. You could keep going, add some glitter, but I'm going to stop here. And we're just going to add our final touch, which is that piece of twine or the little bookmark tassel that comes out the top. Now for these, I'm keeping it simple. I've picked out 6 colors that match my bookmarks, and I'm going to cut each of these to 12 inches. So I cut that first one 12 inches, and then I'll just use that piece to cut all of them. And like I said, I picked out a color that kind of matches. I like this sort of monochromatic background. And then we have our fun images. And you just thread those through the hole. I threaded the loop through there and then you just pull it back through itself. Or you could do it the other way too, whatever works easiest for you. You can also thread the tails in and then just loop it back through itself. And this is just a really simple little tassel for these. You could make a tassel with the twine. I have done that before. It just depends on how much time you want to spend. So here are all my final little bookmarks. Like I said, you could make these with any stamp set you have in your stash or any stencil. I just think that they're so much fun. So I use 6 different stencils and 6 different stamp sets, but you could always pick one theme and make a whole bunch of these. The idea was these would be a great project to do with your kids, and these would be great for them to give out as their Valentines in class. So I hope I have inspired you today to take a look at all your stamps and all your stencils and pull out some of your favorites and just play and make some really simple bookmarks. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.